Well, Abbey, it's so great to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. I'm excited.
Well, we were just having a little bit of conversation. I had to look down the clock and go, wait a minute, we've got to get started here because we were just having a great time talking about, your life and my life and how our circles have already interchanged and exchanged. And so I'm glad to get to know you a little bit more on this, this conversation, this call, but I'm also glad that our listeners have the opportunity to listen in to this because you've got an incredible story. And they get to kind of sit with us at coffee right now and hear you share your story.
I got some tea over here.
Yes. Or is that what you're drinking right now is tea? I've got my coffee. You've got your tea.
Yeah.
And we're going to dive into this. You have a heartbreaking story and a story that, man, God has evidently shown up in huge ways. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, where you guys are, what you guys do, and then we'll dive into some of the difficult things you guys have experienced.
Okay. So I am a wife. Primarily, I'm the grateful wife of David. And we live in Hilton Head Island, the South Carolina Low Country, with our 3 little boys. Yeah. So we've got boys, newly 6, 3, and 1. It is busy and really loud here usually. So I write, in addition to being a wife and a mom, I write and I host a podcast for women who are walking through pregnancy loss. And then, I've written a book about pregnancy loss and then am currently under contract for 6 children's books. So I just love to write and to teach God's word. And, that's my joy.
Wow. That's so cool. That's so cool. Well, yeah, you have this book Held, which is just an incredible, incredible book. And I want to make sure that everybody, doesn't matter if they've, experienced child loss or miscarriage or know somebody who has in their life. I think that what you have brought out of this season of your life and put down on paper is going to be and is helpful for everybody. And so that's what we find out so many times in these conversations, Abbey, is that no matter what you've walked through, there are common denominators, common threads in all of our pain that we can glean from each other because it all points us back to a deeper and richer relationship with the Lord. And so I get to learn from, people like yourself that are walking through and have walked through things that I've not walked through.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure everybody goes to that. We'll talk about that in just a second, but it was birthed out of this thing you never would have wanted to walk through. Something that is so prevalent. So many people have walked through miscarriage. So why don't you go back and kind of tell us at least what you would deem the beginning of that timeline and share with us your story.
So we had just celebrated our firstborn son's first birthday and found out that we were pregnant and we were not trying to be pregnant at that point. So it was sort of a surprise. And I went through how am I going to do this? We were planning to have them so close together. And then we got really excited. So I remember driving to our first appointment with my husband, and I was violently ill for this one. And we heard a heartbeat and rejoiced because we had prayed to hear a heartbeat on the way. So went home and continued to be very sick for a while. And at my 12-week appointment, I went in and they couldn't find a heartbeat using the Doppler. And I did not think anything of it. Davey was just like, okay, I'm sure the baby's just hiding in a corner or something. So they bring in a bigger machine with a screen and they start to look and she's like, I'm not really seeing anything. I'm like, oh, I'm sure it's just hiding in a corner. Literally never thought that something could be wrong. So she was like, you know what, let's see if we can use the bigger equipment. These machines are sort of fuzzy anyway. We're going to get the bigger equipment. So we'll just wait a little bit and we'll go to the big ultrasound room. I was like, okay. So they sent me out into the waiting room. And while I was sitting in the waiting room, I sort of I can remember the feeling in my body, my chest got hot. And I texted my sister-in-law and was like, they sent me the waiting room. I'm waiting to go into the ultrasound room. They can't find a heartbeat. And I started to feel like maybe something's wrong. But when I knew something was wrong was when my sister-in-law walked in the door. And she came right away. She had experienced multiple miscarriages and she knew. So they took us back to the ultrasound room and I still was just naively really hopeful looking at this screen. And I remember them measuring and saying, it looks like the baby hasn't grown since our last appointment. And I just felt like the dumbest person in the room looking around at everyone is there no heartbeat? And it was surreal. Like you want it to be untrue. You want it to not be true. And so I just I literally could not process that the baby had died. But then when it hit hard. And I can remember the doctor coming in, and I just kept apologizing my body was reacting so strongly. Just I was shaking and crying. And I am so grateful to the Lord for this man's kindness and for his belief about dignity, because I remember him placing his hand on my leg and saying, you don't have to apologize. A loss of life is always worth mourning, which is a gift in that moment, because not every OB, I feel like, would say it. So, it took a while, Davey, for that baby to leave my body. That's what they call a missed miscarriage. So it was several weeks of holding it and praying fervently that the Lord would allow us to miscarry naturally. And that prayer was not answered in the affirmative. And so I ended up using medication, inducing miscarriage at home, which is a whole other complexity, because the medicine they give you to induce a miscarriage is the same medicine women take to abort. So that just felt very hard and inhospitable to try. You think, is there any shred of hope this baby's still alive? And I asked for another ultrasound to make double sure before because there's a risk of infection at that point. You can't just hold a lifeless form. Right. And so, so we induced the miscarriage. It was a complicated time in our marriage. It was a traumatic experience, I'd say, doing that at home. And I didn't understand all of what it would look like. And then that sort of led to a broader period of suffering with some other things that occurred as we were eager to try again and unable. So, that's our story with pregnancy loss.
Oh my goodness, man. Abbey, I can even hear just the tenderness in your voice as you're explaining it. Again, I'm sure you've talked about this hundreds of times. I mean, you have a podcast that helps women who have experienced this. And so you're having conversations all the time about this. And yet, even as you share it right now, there's that sense of loss and grief and that void I can hear from you. Which shows me that grief isn't linear.
No, it's not.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like this stair step. It's like, okay, cool. I get to a certain point and I'm beyond where it affects me the same, Can you talk to me a little bit about that, for you and the cycles or the phases of grief that you experience, which, by the way, how amazing that your OB in that moment said that to you, right? I mean, just pause for a second and acknowledge that, like that man, whether he's a believer or not, he was Jesus in that moment. Right?
Oh yeah. And I can see the Lord's provision
in the medical industry.
No, it doesn't. And I can see the Lord's provision both in the form of my sister-in-law coming to sit with me. I'd gone to that appointment alone because I didn't think anything would be, amiss. And so having her show up so I wouldn't be alone, having him validate my grief in a moment, I felt ashamed and out of touch with my own body. I threw up that morning. So why would I think anything was wrong?
Right.
But I think, I've heard grief described with an analogy you're probably familiar with, where it's sort of like a box with a button and a ball. Have you heard this?
Yeah, please explain it. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a button in the box, and it's like a trigger button. And in the beginning, the box is being shaken all the time, so the ball hits the button all the time, causing that pain or those bouts of weeping. And then that gradually, as time goes by, the box is shaken less often, but every now and then you get bumped by something, and so the ball hits the button. So the triggers sort of become fewer and fewer, but when it's hit, it's no less painful than the initial shaking, right? And I think, I think that God was so gracious in those initial days. There was such a profound sense that he was at work, and we had sort of our theological ducks in a row about suffering and who he was. But I think when it got harder for me was those subsequent hits. They almost hit harder because there's like a time for weeping. And then I think we feel like we should be over it or feel it differently. And so I continued to vomit for so long. I was sick for so long. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, Lord, what is there for me to learn here? Could you just let me, I mean, the baby is gone and everyone always says it'll be worth it in the end, but then there's no baby and you're just throwing up, and still really tired. And I wanted my body to get with it. I wanted to, and so those things were harder. Those triggers were harder because, whereas in the beginning I was so acutely aware of his kindness, I feel like the enemy tempted me to believe he was cruel as he sort of allowed those subsequent problems. Or I had shingles right after our miscarriage, which was so painful. And then a breast cancer scare. So we were like, well, we can't try to get pregnant while we were getting all these mammograms and biopsies. And I started to get irritable in those times, So grief is it's not linear. And I think we imagine ourselves to be a certain way, I think, or everybody wants to know what kind of person they are, if they're the kind of person that freezes or runs headlong into danger, or, and I think, you feel proven in the trial and then things continue to be hard. It's sort of, I had need of endurance. Endurance. And I think that's something that he was doing. But even now, I feel like when that button gets hit for me now, I feel grief, but I also feel gratitude, and the book has been really instrumental in that. I think, you mentioned before we started recording the value of your podcast and your ministry, and experiencing what feels like redemption in the wake of your own loss and experience. So,
it makes something senseless, like what you've experienced, what I've experienced. It makes it still have meaning, right?
Yes.
Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. You don't have to have some kind of reason for something before you can have meaning in that thing, right?
Yes.
It's not like we have to have an explanation from God, like, oh, this is why this happened. Okay, now I can move forward and have some kind of purpose within this because now I know the reason why. Often we're not going to know the reason why. And yet when we don't know the reason why, we can still have meaning and we can live out purpose. And what helps is when you see other people impacted by your story.
That does help. Yeah. And because that is the glory of God and the good of others. I think one of the things that was most frustrating, and what I've heard from women as I've talked with them who have lost life in the womb, is people's desire to explain those purposes or to find the earthly purposes, which are as unhelpful as they are unfounded, right? You're like, you're probably avoiding some wayward teenager or a child with disabilities and who knows the reason? And maybe I would have wanted those things over death, So I think looking for the earthly purpose isn't always helpful, but we know from God's word that his purposes in our pain are always to make us more like Christ, the maturation of character, to increase our dependence and intimacy with him. And then also one of his express purposes in our pain is that as we experience comfort from God, we're able to comfort others. So that's a gift. Yes. That's definitely a gift.
Yes. Yeah. And, I love what you said about how, we talk about the classroom of pain quite a bit, right? That you can learn certain things in the season of pain, but, you expressed that you were like, okay, well, didn't I learn what I needed to learn, God? And so now I should move past this season and now be out of pain or onto a different season. There's a time for weeping. Okay. That time's done. And now I'm supposed to move to dancing. It's supposed to be very clean cut. I think that if we, while pain can be a classroom, and that is very important for us to lean into and be a good student of what pain is trying to teach us, what the Lord is trying to teach us in pain. If we reduce it down to just a classroom, then we're missing so much.
Yeah.
So it's not just a cerebral exercise here. Yeah. Right. It's not just even a theological exercise here.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's it's a form of the prosperity gospel, right? Like if I learn the right way, if I grieve well, whatever that means, then I'll be delivered from this. Right. Or once I learn the lesson, I'll move on. And I think a lot of women, when they're experiencing infertility, maybe even in the wake of loss, they're like, once I believe enough or believe the right way, or once I don't want this anymore, then the Lord will give it to me. And I think, God is better than anything we could get from him. And so I think, when we realize the gift is God himself, it helps us to endure. It helps us to endure.
Yeah. And I love that you were saying, I needed perseverance. I needed endurance.
Oh,
because it's really, Romans 5 tells us this, right? That it's suffering that produces perseverance.
Yeah.
Right. So you need perseverance in order to endure suffering. And yet it's suffering that produces that in you.
Yes.
And then perseverance produces character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's the goal, right? It's character that produces hope. So Jesus is the goal for this. It's like, my hope is in Christ. My hope is not in anything else that he could give me or not give me. And out of that, I'm becoming more like the person of Jesus.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which ultimately is becoming more and more dependent on the Father, wanting the Father more than anything else, even being on the other side of pain. Right. And I think that's one of the beauty of, you see in Psalm 23 that the psalmist walks through the valley of the shadow of death.
Yes.
And Psalm 139, David talks about being hemmed in, and miscarriage is such a human experience. We are hemmed in by our weakness and fatigue and, our will. We can't will our baby to stay alive, or we can't will our bodies to function the way that we want them to. But in our humanity and in our weakness and in our limitation, we learn to depend on a limitless God and in our inability to get ourselves out of the situation, he holds us in time and space too for a purpose. And I think the beauty of being in the valley is learning to want him and treasure him in the valley more than we desire to be on the other side of suffering. And should we be there on this side of glory, our relationship with him is sweeter on the other side. The grass is greener because he's there, not because it's the other side of the valley. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm only 36, and I'm not going to ask you how old you are, because I grew up in the South, and so it's very rude to ask any woman how old they are. However,
I might not remember.
We're both young.
Yeah.
We're both fairly young, but the longer I live, the more I realize, like, life just keeps getting more difficult.
Yeah.
It doesn't get easier,
Yeah.
And I think that's part of this whole thing of life, is that, we don't just like have this one suffering that we go through. And it's like, oh, well, that was my suffering for life. There it was. I lost my wife at 30 years old, and there it is. That's my suffering for life.
Yeah.
You lost a baby at, I don't know how old, but that's your suffering for life. That's not the case. It actually continues to get more difficult sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet it also at the same time can be sweeter. And those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think, you talked about the maturation of character through suffering. And when I said the words, that I had need of endurance, I'm thinking of Hebrews, when the writer says to strengthen our weak knees. And I feel like now the forms of suffering that I encounter, I experience differently because of the work the Lord did in that perceivably greater suffering, where I was really paying attention. Because I think when it's a comfort to know that he's sovereign over all things, even the little ones, like vomiting after you are not pregnant anymore, or, just stubbing your toe in the kitchen when you're trying to be kind to your kids, whatever form of suffering it is in a fallen world. I think when we know he's sovereign over every detail, it's a comfort because we know his character and we know his promises. And so knowing his goodness, and having that be impressed upon us in suffering is what leads to endurance. We keep running because we see what's ahead, and the things that, like Romans 8:28, that those trials that we face, they're for our good and they're for his glory, but they're also preparing us for glory. And so we run towards that. We endure, we develop endurance by seeing his goodness and believing his promises.
Yeah. Abbey, in the immediate aftermath of this loss, I wonder if you can share with us some of the things that began to maybe be unearthed, different difficult questions or doubts. You said your quote unquote theological ducks were in a row, right? So you grew
in
up
my head,
really trusting in the Lord, right in your head, right? Exactly. But anytime we go through suffering, it all of a sudden kind of just upends that.
Yeah.
And now we're face to face with the, like, do I really believe this? And now there's all these questions that we maybe never had before. Can you enlighten us to maybe some of those questions that begin to come up for you? And I'm sure as you're talking with other women who have experienced these questions that they're experiencing as well, you know, as they suffer this kind of loss.
Well, I think it just makes you suspicious about the character of God. You know, any form of suffering causes us to wonder, okay, either you're fully in control, but you're not actually very good, or you are really good, but you're not as powerful as I thought you were, because there's no way that a good, loving God would let this happen to me, which really exposes unbiblical thinking. Because what do we think? What is our view of ourselves if we think we deserve, you know, you name it, any earthly good, which is a grace. I think learning to hold those things in tension, and to be honest, like there were times I think in that initially, I felt like my faith was being strengthened. I felt an intimacy with the Lord. As things dragged on and I got tired, you know, I don't know if you exercise, but I recently I've been challenging myself with planks and push-ups, and trying to increase my ability. But like, there comes a point where you can't do one more push-up. You know, I don't care how strong you are, like the body gives out. Right. And I think that in that second wave of suffering, the ongoingness of it, I hit a point where I couldn't do any more push-ups. And that's when my mind failed, is when my faith sort of failed. But I think that's a gift, reaching the end of yourself that way. And maybe even reaching the end of your faith. Because it's a gift to know that that faith is a gift we receive and not another work. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, though I felt that great intimacy with the Lord, faith was a work for me in the wake of our miscarriage. Like, I'm going to suffer well. I'm going to believe right. I'm going to run to the right place. And, you know, but when I hit that point of cynicism, I feel like the Lord was like, here we go. Come on. Like, come to me this way. You know, come taste my goodness. Bring me your bitterness. Bring me your tears. Bring me your messy version of you and see me be good to you. You know, and I think in that place, not only was I aware of my weakness, I was also aware of my fallenness, you know, like thinking thoughts I was ashamed of, and so that we've been composting, and my kids are like super into it. But, you know, one of my 6-year-old has landfill anxiety. He's like, if we put the food scraps in the landfill, they're just going to become sour and stinky and like never be able to become nutrients, whatever. In the wrong environment, doing the wrong thing with them is going to make them, you know, too much nitrogen or whatever. But we have our compost bin where we're like paying attention to the balance and adding more brown stuff to make sure that it turns into rich soil. And I think, you know, the way that I process that second portion would make me think that I was not suffering well because of what I was feeling: cynicism, bitterness, fear, anger. But the reality was like, it's not what's in the bin, you know, or it's where we take it. And so I feel like when I learned to bring those messy things to the Lord, not turning away in shame, but realizing that is who Christ died for, that person, that faithless person, that cynical person, that bitter person, that self-protective person, that selfish person, that entitled person, like that's where I feel like that soil became rich and fertile ground for the renewal of faith and growth. So I think and John Piper talks about this, that sometimes when our faith feels like it slips out of sight, that's when our view of God is actually the greatest, because our view of ourselves is so diminished. You know, we don't, we wonder if we're even a Christian because our faith feels so small. And that's when we learn to really trust that he's holding us, you know, that he's upholding us with his righteous right hand, and that he's not going to let go. So I think in the places where we're weakest or rawest, that's some of the most fertile ground if we'll run to him, to him with that. Yeah. That's so good. It's like the times where the Lord's like, okay, now you're actually being honest with me. Yes. You know, you're actually being honest now. Now there's something we can do with this. This is a power I can paint on. It's scary to get there in suffering, because I think I sort of thought, what if I don't come back from here? Like, what if I really let myself be honest and I can't get up? Like, what if I express my doubts to the Lord and this is the beginning of my deconstruction? You know,
Wow.
It's hard to entrust to him the hardest parts because we're afraid of what might happen if we, but what happens when we run to the Lord with those doubts and emotions and fears and, you know, misgivings or whatever is a deeper intimacy, which is what exactly makes suffering lead to the maturation of character is dependence on him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. All right. I've got a really interesting question that I'm kind of curious about. We've been talking quite a bit over the past several episodes. What has emerged from some of the conversations is this idea of deconstruction. Right?
Oh yeah.
Obviously this is kind of a buzzword right now, right?
Yeah.
And this is, so maybe it's in the macro conversation and just kind of it's creeping into it. But on some level, what we've kind of, you know, what we've been tracking with is like, there is on some level, some sort of deconstruction that has to happen. And yet what we tend to be afraid of in the church is, wow, when someone goes into deconstruction, you know, type movement or whatever, they're going to throw everything out. And oftentimes that happens. Unfortunately, they walk away from faith because they realize what, you know, the faith that I've been taught isn't holding up to this life that I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And that is not at all the case for our faith. It's just that, you know, unfortunately that's the faith that they've been taught. And it's a watered down faith. Right. And so I can just sense from you, because of, you know, even just like a little bit of your background, you just referenced John Piper. You've got, you know, a very strong theological doctrinal background. You hold God's word at a very high regard, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you have this life experience that kind of has met that. And you just said, it's okay to come to the end of your faith because it's right there that you might actually discover true faith. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about, as you're just let this kind of evaluate for me through the lens of your suffering. To what extent does our faith need to break down and disintegrate? And to what extent does our faith hold us in these, you know what I mean? It is a very nuanced question, but I just feel like that's something that, you know, maybe you could speak to quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I think we overestimate our capacity for belief. As human beings, you know, Jesus talked about mustard seed faith. And I think that I don't think it's necessarily that our faith needs to break down as much as our idols need to be exposed. Because I think what I would have imagined to be faith was actually idolatry. Like, I mentioned having my theological ducks in a row. Like I would have considered myself above doubt, you know, or like God's word, having a high view of scripture is so important to me, but also having a place among the people who have a high view of scripture is important to me. You know, like being recognized as a good mind or being praised for having sound theology. And so I think it was good for me to get to that point of like, if you don't hold me, I'm lost. I talk about this in the book. There was a scenario where we went to the beach and my son was like wave jumping with my husband and just one of those mammoth waves came. And my husband jerked him up at the last possible moment. They weren't holding hands or anything, but he would have been totally under and, you know, having that traumatic experience of like water up your nose and being rolled and stuff. And it would have been so silly if upon coming up from the wave, he would have been like, oh man, good thing I was holding your hand, Dad. Because the reality is like David was holding him and that's the reason he wasn't pummeled, you know? And I think my faith was in my grip, not in the Lord's grip of me. And I think that's the beauty of lament too, right? When we shake our fists at the Lord long enough, our hands get tired and they open, and you know that it gives way to resignation that allows for us to be ministered to. And I just think coming to a place of weakness is always a gift to faith. And arguably, I think people who deconstruct all the way are still having a lot of faith in their intellect all the way.
Yeah.
Wow. So I think the place where we need to get is to a posture of humility, which is what Eve didn't have, right? She reached for knowledge and instead of reaching for the Lord. And we see Job and David do the opposite. They come to the end of their knowledge, and David says, your knowledge is it's too high for me. And Job gets to the end and sees the Lord in the storm and is like, I'm humbled. And so that's what the beauty of suffering is, I think, is that it just humbles us. And what better position are we in to depend or to worship than humility, to say, this is too big for my mind. And I think ultimately deconstruction is when we get to doubt, and instead of responding in humility, we allow pride to take over, because it's not like when people deconstruct, they have any better answers. There aren't better answers there. There's just, there's just autonomy.
Yeah, there is. There's autonomy, and there is somehow the justification that their questions their question somehow explains away the existence of a God or the interaction of a God who just can't seem to hold space for questions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, he more than can hold space for questions.
Yeah.
Right. And as you said, take those raw, honest questions to him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you'll find him.
Yeah. And we don't err by he's big enough to take our, arguably, Davey, I think that bringing our questions to God is really an act of worship. Because when we do bring our doubts and questions to God, we acknowledge that he is the one who knows all things. Behind the lament, why is this happening to me? Saying that to God is the acknowledgement that he is the one in control. And so the things we're most afraid to say are really the things we need to say as an act of worship to tether ourselves to him. Why is this happening to me? You are in control. You could do something about it. Why would you allow this to happen? You are good. And this feels inconsistent with your character. So we're really confessing his goodness and his omnipotence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, Abby? Now that I think about this, you're talking about lament, and I think about worship songs. This just occurred to me. I don't know. And I maybe have to go through an inventory of worship songs and just look at it a little bit closer. But this is the first thought that just came to my mind. How many worship songs just end with questions, right? That just it's like, I've just got all these questions for you, God, right? Obviously, David said, how long, O Lord, how long, O Lord, right? But it often resolves itself within the worship song. It feels like, you've got, 3 stanzas in a bridge, and, choruses peppered throughout. And it's like, we're going to find some kind of resolve, make some kind of declarative statement of faith right here, because that's what makes us feel better. But I wonder if there's room at all for just worship songs. That's so interesting that you said questioning, having questions for God is worship,
Yeah. Yes. Well, and there's one. So the hymn book God gave his people, right, is the Psalms. Right. And there's one, Psalm 88, ends with very morbid. I think the last line is something like, I'm alone, or it's all dark here, or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. But one of the gifts I feel like in my suffering, Davey, and what helped me continue going to church surrounded by pregnant women and little tiny babies when I just longed for my womb to be full, or my arms to be full, was that our church so faithfully sings songs of lament. Sufferers are welcome there. And I was affirmed over and over that the church had need of my weeping, because it couldn't fulfill the command to weep with those who weep if there was no one to weep with. And so my tears were welcome. My questions were welcome, because that's a gift to the body, in the same way that it's a gift to rejoice with those who are rejoicing. But I think that's one place we err as believers, is we don't hold that tension well, and when we pass over it, the fallenness of this world, or our own depravity, even we make little of Christ's sacrifice because it seems unnecessary. And I think when we sit in suffering with one another, we see our need for Jesus. I hated our Good Friday service this year. I hated it. Because they played this super dissonant, violin piano thing, and I couldn't find the rhythm or the melody. And it just went on and on as people were walking up to the cross and doing this sensory participation thing. But I was thinking, you know what? This is such a gift to have to sit here, because we don't do that well. We don't sit. And the Lord invites us to do that. Moreover, he is with us in it.
Wow. I mean, talking from an artistry standpoint, your entire, like everything about your being wants to resolve that note. There's that dissonant note that's just kind of pervasive there, and it wants to resolve it. It's like, come on, find that like resolve within the chord there. And I mean, how appropriate is it that they're playing this as like as that felt, where it's like this is what life feels like a lot of times.
Yes.
One day we will experience the resolve of this when Jesus parts the skies and he comes, back and he sets all things right.
Yeah.
J.R.R. Tolkien says that he makes all things sad untrue.
Yeah. Same way as Game Team. Yes. But we expect this day to be that day. And that's where we make an error, like, and that's the beauty of intense suffering is that, or even ongoing suffering, that we stop hoping for that day on this side of eternity, and look forward to that one eternal day when everything sad comes untrue. And that's what, the book, I mean, spoiler alert if anyone's getting it, but like the book ends with the line, God's plan of redemption cannot be miscarried. Like you wonder what other forms of suffering might be lurking but one day he will make it right.
Wow.
And that's a steady anchor for the soul,
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Man. You bring up something interesting about just like, the community that we have within church circles, within family, within friends. I don't know. I mean, you could speak to this a lot more because you're having a lot of conversations and you've experienced yourself, but it seems like suffering in general, but particularly with miscarriage, ironically, it's something that so many people have experienced and yet not a lot of people are talking about. It's almost like it becomes this sense of like, you become in some ways like the untouchable, like you kind of keep all of that at bay. Because if you bring that, your questions, your doubts, your suffering, your lament, if you bring that into the camp here, it's gonna cause a disease or an outbreak in the camp. I mean, suffering in general has that vibe sometimes in communal circles, which is why I think the church has not historically done a great job of providing space for that. I'm so glad to hear that your church has really provided a great space for that.
Me too.
But that's novel. I mean, that's not.
Yeah.
It's very rare and unique. But I wonder how much of that communal that you can speak to in terms of what did you see was done well for the people around you as they kind of helped to carry you? What wasn't done well? What about your, I mean, I can see you're doting on your husband as we get on to them, so that it does something in your marriage as well. There's a suffering together within all of this. Can you talk about some of the communal experience, both your marriage and your church family or community?
Definitely. I think church family, it's a mixed bag, and you can tell when you suffer, it becomes very clear who has suffered in the way they respond to you. Because no one who's suffered is saying at least, and there's such a revelation too of an inconsistency.
Just pause right there. Let's just say that. Let's just equip everybody who's listening to this with like, here's one of the things to not ever say. Don't ever say at least. If you immediately are about to start a phrase with at least, just stop right there.
Yeah. Yes. Just stop.
That's good. I mean, wow.
Yeah. But it also exposes like, the evangelical church in general is outraged over abortion, but we're so quick to say, at least you were early, or it was probably a gift because of some chromosomal abnormality. What are we saying we believe about the dignity of life then? That like babies with disabilities are not valuable? Are we saying that babies that are young are not actually babies? And so we need to be real careful and tread real lightly. And I think there's also this like economy of grief where like some people's grief is greater. That's an area of shame for me. I almost didn't write the book because I hadn't had multiple miscarriages. Or I disqualified myself because I wasn't as far along as friends of mine who were farther. And the Lord's been so kind to me because I hear from women who have lost at full term, or women who are on their 5th miscarriage who have been ministered to by this book. And I'm just like, won't he do it? But we don't want to, I think like one of the reasons we don't engage with women who have miscarried is because we don't see their pain as legitimate. It was an early loss, or no one could see it. It's such a hard grief because what's lost hasn't been seen by anyone's eyes usually.
Yeah.
Maybe the mother's.
Like quiet desperation.
Yes. It's an invisible loss. And a lot of the loss, I know you know this, your wife was pregnant when you lost her. And so there's an ambiguous loss there. There's a dream that's lost. Yeah. And so you're not sure if that's legitimate because it's an imagined future beyond the reality of a child, which culture is invalidating its life by saying it was early or small. Or its life doesn't count apart from its mother in secular circles. So I think when the church shows up with its beliefs surrounding sanctity of life for the women who miscarry, that is when healing happens. How can we receive the comfort of the Lord if our pain is being minimized or dismissed by others or ourselves? And so we're inviting we cannot lead one another to the comforter if we're saying, oh, you're not really in pain. Which maybe at the bottom of it is love, because we don't want people to be in pain. But we're denying them true comfort by not singing them the songs of lament that we've been given to sing to one another. Yeah. So I'm grateful for and there was a lot of need for grace for the women who made the at least comments, and it's invisible, right? So you're getting questions all the time from people who are unknowing about, like, when are you going to have another one? Or doesn't he need a sibling? Or, I think, and two, like moving to we turn each other's eyes towards earthly things instead of encouraging one another to look towards heaven. There'll be another baby. Right. Like, why are we offering platitudes that aren't promises of Scripture? They're better. Like the promises in Scripture. Yeah. Promises of Scripture are better. Our rainbow babies might not be on the way, So, I think I'm grateful for the women who held space for me and who said, this is sad, and didn't really say anything beyond that, because I think the Lord will lead us there if we can get to the place where we're honest about our pain. And the gospel is good news for sufferers. So,
That's so good. Okay, put a pin in the second part of my question, right? We'll come back to that.
This is the marriage part.
David, right? Yeah. Because you brought something up that I think is really important in this. Mm-hmm. You said that there's some, like, when you've lost, especially in terms of an early child loss. Yeah. It's the dreams. There's so many other secondary and tertiary losses that follow that often don't get acknowledged. We often describe it as layers of loss. That you have this kind of initial thing that, that's the big tragedy, but really it's kind of the stuff underneath it that you've got to dig a little bit deeper to find, the losses that are a little bit more ambiguous, but you've got to put some language around it. Otherwise, those losses will creep up later, in the form of unresolved and unaddressed trauma. Yeah. And so talk a little bit about those. Can you just kind of acknowledge some of those tertiary losses that people experience in this kind of a situation?
Yeah. Well, I think, immediately when a woman finds out she's pregnant, at least in my experience, you go to, what's the due date? And then you think about, like, okay, what does that mean for my maternity leave if you're working? Or you think, one of the silly ones for me is, what is that? And I know Halloween is like your costume party is like an important part of your story with. But I thought about Halloween, and I'll have a big belly, and won't it be so fun to dress up my big belly? Like, what will be a basketball team or and then you get to those places and that costume is not a go anymore because your belly's not big, it's flat and empty. And so there are these important dates that you pass as markers, or you see families with kids that are close together, or people say, how far apart are your kids? And then it feels irrelevant in labor to say, well, they would have been 21 months apart, but now they're this far apart. And I think also there's the ambiguous loss of time, like the loss of money if people were doing infertility treatments and then lost post conception in that way. Like there are a lot of things that are subsequent losses. And perhaps, like we were so blessed to have a baby already when we experienced loss of life in the womb. But for women who don't have living children outside of the womb, the calendar is a trigger. You're just, you're getting older and you thought you'd have a family by now and you don't. And, those things are hard. And you asked about marriage. I think this is one of the things that makes miscarriage really tricky too in grieving as a couple, because I did that. My husband did not do that. I remember with all of our living children, the 20-week ultrasound, it's when he was like, oh, we're pregnant, and this baby left my body at what would have been 12 weeks. And so he wasn't really with it yet with me. Yeah. He conceptually, it was different for him. And grief looked different for him. He was grieving different things, even though we were both grieving the loss of a child. And so I remember being surprised. This was one of the humbling things for me. Like, you hear suffering makes you stronger, and then your marriage is in a really hard spot because you're suffering. It's like, well, this wasn't what I thought this would look like. But in the same way that the humility and the form of doubt was a gift to me. Like the struggle that we faced post that loss. I remember wanting him to come when when the baby left my body. I wanted him to look. And he didn't want to look. And that was a profoundly lonely place. But the reality is that I think a lot of the things I interpreted as sin against me were not sin. They were just his limited humanity. It was, he is a limited human being. I am a limited human being. And God is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, and my husband is not. He can't be with me all the time. There are places he can't go because he's human. And so really, though that was like a hard stripping point for us, it was such a gift to our marriage because we learned to relate to one another as human beings and not saviors. So that was, it was a gift ultimately. But I think that miscarriage is a complicated grief to walk through as a couple because, and the experience of the mother is physiological too. There's hormonal changes and your body's changing or not changing. And those things are not as acutely felt by a spouse in that situation. And,
it's not everyone's the same. Not all men are the same. And yet what you're describing, Abbey, is very consistent with so much that I've heard from men in their experience with their wife's miscarriage. It's that, I didn't really feel kind of attached to the pregnancy or really see it as like, oh, we're pregnant until later on in the pregnancy. And obviously it's, from, the moment of conception, a woman is being affected physiologically. And so then her emotions are getting very tied into all of this as well. And so it already puts you on two different pages in a lot of ways. It becomes that dissonant chord, and so then grief, and there's a reason why so many marriages struggle and then end up severing after child loss of any nature because of not being able to walk through that grief together, because it is not an easy thing to walk together. You're going to be on different pages of grief. You're going to experience that grief differently. Yeah.
And you say pages, but I think another helpful analogy is paths. That
that's good.
as the Lord leads us through the valley, he might not be leading us at the same pace or through the same avenues. And so David's path through suffering seemed a lot quicker than mine. And my path was longer and more winding. And I think there were things the Lord revealed to me, conversations he allowed me to have that really he used in the book so much. Like, he protected me from saying offensive things or, not considering the person who had lost at this point or experienced this. And by allowing me to experience such a full scope. And that was a gift. And so I think just as we have to trust the Lord with what he gives us, we have to trust his sovereignty over the experience of our spouse and entrust them to him, and entrust our experience of, if we're experiencing loneliness in marriage, like, we're near to Christ in that place. He was lonely. And so that can be a gift. Loneliness in marriage can be a gift. Like when our spouses don't meet all of our needs, that's a good thing, because that idol of, wanting them to save us is exposed, and they can't do that. And that's too great a burden for them to bear,
Wow. Wow. It's so good. What would I don't want to reduce this down to just being like, what are some practical, helpful, you know what I mean? I don't necessarily want it because this is very rich and very nuanced and very, right. But I do wonder, like, I can learn from your perspective, right? And then you can also shed light to help, the women out there as well. But if you're speaking to a group of men right now who they've just discovered, or, they're about to discover that their wife is going to miscarry, how would you help them? What would you want them to understand about, what their wife is experiencing so that they can better hold space there,
Yeah.
Of course, they're not going to be perfect. They're going to be, like you said, this is going to reveal more of their humanity than anything else. They're not the hero coming in to rescue, right, by any means. But I do think that maybe we can learn how to hold space better in that.
Yeah.
How to walk with you in that,
I think understanding is really important, but no insight that I could provide about, because you mentioned everybody's different, no insight I could provide about their wives' experience is going to be more powerful than the urging to embrace their humanity and to depend on the Father and to encourage their wives to do the same. I think there's so much shame. So, there's sort of a companion resource to my book coming out with the Good Book Company in the fall with Eric Shoemaker, who it's called Ours. And he talks in great detail about feeling shame as a dad. And, in the same way my husband wasn't able to look, he wasn't able to be with his wife during her D&C. He was overwhelmed and left. And he experienced a lot of shame. And I think the most important thing is maintaining humility that leads to a posture of dependence on the Lord. And humility also leads us, the psalmist ends Psalm 139, like he sees how great God is. And then he says, search my heart. And if there's any wrong way, like change it. And that's what humility does. And I think, you're going to fail your wife. You're going to fail her because you're human and you're going to wrong her intentionally, maybe unintentionally. And you won't be God to her. And so I think like being able to say, I'm limited and I'm sorry is so important. And that will be the thing that keeps you, and trusting her to the Lord will be the thing that keeps you from trying to rush her through her grief. It'll allow you to sit with her the way that Jesus sits with us. So I think if you're feeling weak, be weak with her. That's a gift. If you're feeling strong, be strong next to her. That's a gift. And then recognize that there are things you can't be for her. So encourage her to open the Word or to be with other women or put her in the path of people who have suffered, who know the Word of God and uphold it. I think just entrusting her to the Lord and having grace. And I would recommend, I read that book for the sake of endorsing it, and it's a gift. So I would recommend picking that up because he'll have a lot more helpful words. Yeah. Man, that's really good. That's really good. I want to talk a little bit about kind of how writing, has helped you work out some of this grief and helped you find, as we talked about at the beginning of this, helped you find some meaning in it as well. I find that those are twofold, right? It's like, this is helping me to kind of work this out a little bit. This is helping me. This is becoming very cathartic and therapeutic to be able to write some of this stuff down. And at the same time, it also provides hope for other people. And so it becomes meaningful. So can you just tell me a little bit about, what was writing something you always had a desire for? Was it something that you were already doing? Like, did it come into the picture shortly after? What was your journey with that? And how did it interplay with this suffering? Yeah. Well, like everyone else, I had a mom blog at the time. With a small following. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember how many thousands of followers I had at that point, but when we lost that baby, I shared in real time. And I think in a way, it was a form of accountability for me because I was committed to processing my pain through the lens of Scripture. And, a lot of people will say to hold it until you're healed. And I think there's a difference between cathartically, like vomiting all over everyone, and like hospitably welcoming people into your pain. And I felt a particular calling, Davey, to shed light on the experience because it isn't talked about.
Yeah.
And I will be the first to tell you that when I experienced miscarriage, one of my first thoughts was, this is so much more sad than I ever imagined. Like people say, oh, I lost a baby, and you're, oh, that's so sad. Sorry. But now when people tell me they've lost a baby, I'm like, it's absolutely. I experienced it differently. So I chronicled it in real time, which was a gift. And it sort of provided a place, I think, for others. And also offered, an opportunity for people who hadn't experienced miscarriage, to have more understanding for those who had. But it was cathartic for me. It was a form of accountability to process through the lens of scripture. And then, also to be edited was a gift, like I was initially planning to offer this resource, which is just 31 days through the most intense part of grief, like to process the shock or whatever. I was initially planning to offer it through email, and then a publisher was interested and advocated for the value of a hard copy to hold something tangible when there wasn't anything to hold. Yeah. And so being edited was a gift. And fine tuning my thinking about suffering. And now I
was
cannot.
That tough, though? I mean, you can now say it was a gift, but I also have to imagine that implicit within that, it's like, well, that kind of hurts to like have my raw, real words be edited and like, you know what I mean?
Well, and by a girl, I love my editor. I'm working with her again now on the books that I'm doing, but she's young and she's single and I feel like any author, I think, will tell you when they first get edits, they stomp around their house for a minute and you're like, she has no idea.
It's like, you don't have a clue. Wait a minute.
I know. But I think I mean, we've talked about humility being a gift this whole time. And like now I don't even want to post something on Instagram that Katie hasn't read because I trust her.
Without saying,
you get used to being edited and you want to be careful, so she, she's shown me the value of community and the insights of others. And but they call it killing your darlings in the author world. Like, they put to death things that aren't helpful. And, it's humbling.
Yeah.
But
is that an Anne Lamott quote? Is that?
Yeah, it is. It is.
It
is. It is.
Wow.
But the writing, the writing was a gift. It was also really hard, Davey. Like, I started that conversation with an editor at 37 weeks pregnant with our second child. So, and then 2 weeks after he was born, we started negotiating the contract. So I had a new baby while I was writing it. And I feel like I was held in that headspace for so much longer because I just was thinking about suffering, writing about suffering for a year. And I wonder how my experience of grief would have been different if I wasn't writing that book because I just stayed there for so long. And then even now, like there's still an onslaught of stories. People read the book and then they want to share their story. And so I haven't been able to move on. I've moved forward, but I think that's another reason that tears pool so quickly is because it's just such a common form of loss, and it doesn't make it any less sad that it's common. But the Lord has been so gracious in the form of reviews or emails or whatever for him to show me how he's worked through it has been such a kindness. And especially we talked about deconstruction, but my favorite ones to read are the ones where the women say, I am so angry with God, or I just didn't feel like I could believe anymore. And that's who the book's for, so to see their faith be strengthened, for their weak knees to be strengthened instead of for their, I think Hebrews says like, strengthen your weak knees so they don't go out of joint or something. Like that's been such a gift and such a humbling thing. Yeah.
Wow. I don't know how to resolve this, but I do think you bring up a really interesting point that I feel like I resonate with, and just how it can seem like sometimes it kind of prolongs your grief or gets you stuck in that, at least that grief space or that community, because you're ministering to people there and you're writing about stuff and you're, and it's like, there's a tension that's held there where it's like, I'm grateful to be able to do that. I'm grateful that we sit here and have a conversation on this podcast, but sometimes you look at folks who are able to, as you said, move on, or, in conjunction with moving forward, they're also able to move on and then not think about this season of their life, or, they can kind of just, and you go, sometimes I desire that, and then sometimes at the same time, I'm so grateful that I'm here and that I'm in this, and that I'm like kind of carrying this cross in some ways and choosing to pick it up every day so that we can be a help to other people. And there's certainly not a resolve there. It's not like I don't have a resolution for that. It's just like a tension that you kind of just are in a lot. Yeah. And so I guess I'm saying that to say thank you for willingly picking up that cross for, on behalf of other people. If you don't ever hear that from anybody else, I understand it a little bit. And so thank you for doing that.
Well, that's a kind word.
I know that not everybody chose to do that,
Yeah. Well, and I think writing,
some people just don't want to remember.
Yeah. And writing in this age, there's a lot more access. Like you just hear a lot more, which is a blessing, but that you do hold a lot of space for those stories, and it can be taxing. But I think one of the gifts that you and I have by sitting in the position of interacting with suffering people all the time is that we stay awake, and we have no choice but to realize this day is not what that day will be. And so we look forward to that day all the more. And we're grateful for Christ, so thankful for his finished work as we observe his ongoing work in suffering. That's a gift to have to stay awake to those things, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, Abby's book that came out, last year, 2 years ago? Last year?
2020. I think it's September 2020.
2020, yeah. Yeah. It's called Held, 31 Biblical Reflections on God's Comfort and Care in the Sorrow of Miscarriage. Again, it's not just for you if you've experienced miscarriage or if you're walking with somebody who has. This is for you just to get a window into grief in and of itself, and to lament, into the heart of God. I mean, I think that we can all learn so much even from each other, even if we haven't walked through the same thing that the other person has walked through. And so I want to encourage you to pick this up. And also your podcast, the Held podcast, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And on that, you're having conversations. What kind of conversations are we talking about here?
Yeah, so it's a supplemental resource to the book. So topics the book doesn't address with women I really respect, like pregnancy after loss, or how to know when to try again, or what to do with hurtful words, or I think we're about to record a second season. So that's exciting. Awesome. Like a father's perspective is one of the ones, and multiple miscarriages, degrees of grief, talking about losing a baby at 38 weeks versus 17 weeks, and how trauma varies or sorrow varies, So that podcast has been a gift. Those women are awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Abby, thanks for spending time with us and just, really feeding us today. I mean, you really fed my soul, and I know everybody who's listening to this right now. And so thank you for doing that. Thank you for walking through what you have walked through, and walking through it. I say, well, of course it's not, none of us walked through it perfectly by any means, but you're stewarding it well. And so thank you for stewarding it well, and to help other people, as scripture tells us that we are afflicted and been comforted so that we can comfort other people in their afflictions. And you're doing that certainly in more spaces than just the space of miscarriage. And so thank you for doing that, and for spending time with us. Where can we follow you? Where can we continue to just keep track with your journey?
Yeah. Instagram at Abbey Wedgeworth. And I think it's abbywedgeworth.com. So would love to connect or hear stories. Always grateful. And thank you for your hospitality. And it's always a gift to have a conversation about suffering and the things of God. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Abbey.
Yeah.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.